Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University presents the Walrus Talks Disruption. I'm Shelley Ambrose, Executive Director and Publisher of the Walrus, and we are thrilled to be back here at Theatre Junction Grand. We acknowledge we are in traditional Treaty 7 territory, and we acknowledge the descendants of these First Peoples continue to live in this area and are deeply tied here in practice, daily life, and ceremony. We're grateful to be here in the community, and as always, it's nice to be home. I would like to do a very special welcome to their honors, the Lieutenant Governor of Alberta, Lois Mitchell, and Doug Mitchell, who are friends and very strong supporters of not just the Walrus, but all Albertans and the Canadian conversation. Thank you for being here. I would also like to welcome, for the first time, she has never been to a Walrus Talks, the British Consul General Caroline Saunders. She is here somewhere. Welcome to the Walrus. And I'd like to thank each and every one of you for coming out to spend some time with us tonight. The weather is beautiful. You could have chosen many other ways to spend your time, including lining up at a cannabis store for your bag of choice bud. But you decided to be here, and we're very grateful for your presence. So this optimistic project called The Walrus started 15 years ago, and we recognize that Canada's conversation, as our little video shows, is complex and necessary and needs to take many forms. Those forms at The Walrus are fact-based journalism in The Walrus magazine, The Walrus books, The Walrus podcasts, and in rooms like this at The Walrus Talks. So no matter how you consume The Walrus or what you're doing while you consume it, we embrace our commitment to be independent and to bring together interesting and interested people who care about the issues that matter. So we've played this game before, some of us. Hands up if you read The Walrus. Yay. Hands up if you support it financially by subscribing or donating. Ooh, that's good. I love you. You're my people. You are my people. I want to take a moment to give a big shout out to our financial, you're all spiritual supporters, and we love that, but to our financial supporters, subscribers, of course, but corporate sponsors and partners, and our donors. We have a lot of donors here tonight, and I want to call them out by name because the truth of the matter is, know them, know you, know us. So we have a matching campaign on at the Walrus right now. And our donors are matching the donations. The donations are being matched dollar for dollar by a couple in Toronto between now and the end of December. So we have a number of Calgarians that have already joined in on the match. And I just want to call out some of their names. A couple of them are board members. I'd like you to stand up when I call your name. How's that? Chima and Kim Durham, Chethan Lakshman, Karen Prentice, the folks from Suncor, Donna and John Ferrara Kerr, Pam Hurd, Dick and Lois Haskane, Kelly Houston and Gordon Salahor, Darcy Levesque, Jeff Kovitz and Micheline Mailer, the folks from RBC, Bennett Jones, Mary Rosetta Coquet, Irfan Rauji, Sharon Watkins, and the incredible Ann, John, Jane, and Roxanne McKeag, Colin Jackson, and Arlene Strom. Those people standing, thank you. Thank you so much. Fantastic. I have another incredible thing to tell you. This Walrus Talks event tonight is our 99th Walrus Talks. Yeah. And the reason that's really relevant is the Walrus Talks started in this room, in this theater, in 2011. So it's great to be here for our 99th. Thank you for all of that. So hands up if you've attended a Walrus Talks before. Welcome back, everyone. Hands up if you're new. Time to welcome the new people. Thanks for coming out. So as I mentioned, there's no way we can do the work we do. We're just 28 people in a basement. That's what the Walrus is, 28 people in a basement. We couldn't do the work we do without our partners, and one of our strongest, longest partnerships is with the folks at Concordia University. I think we have some Concordia alumni with us tonight. Where are you? Welcome to the Concordians. Thank you for being with us. So we've been working with Concordia for several really quite stellar years as part of their Thinking Out Loud series. And since we first met them way back when, we were so impressed by their approach to education and the way they design programs to prepare their alumni to be at the forefront of disruptions in all sectors. And they make the best attempts at using these disruptions to make a better world. To tell us a bit more, please welcome our friend, Concordia University's Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs, Graham Carr.
Thanks very much, Shelley. It's great to be back here, back in Calgary for this terrific event. It's been a wonderful partnership that Concordia has had the privilege to have with the Walrus over the last several years. And it's great to see the huge appetite for this series in the city of Calgary. We all know that seismic changes, disruptive changes are happening around us every moment of the day. And in the university milieu, universities are not the kind of institutions that are built to deal with disruption, typically. And at Concordia, as we are trying to position ourselves as Canada's next generation university, our goal is to actually propose disruptive solutions to the disruptive challenges that we're facing. And let me just take a moment to tell you a little bit about the university that we are and how we're trying to approach this challenge. In Alberta, I have to start by saying that we're Concordia University in Montreal, Quebec. I know there's a Concordia in Alberta. We're a university that has over 50,000 students. We're one of Canada's most diverse universities. We have students coming from more than 150 countries around the world. About 20% of our student population is international. 25% of our students speak French as a first language. 25% speak a language other than French or English as a first language. And the picture I'm trying to draw is one of diversity, because we believe that celebrating diversity is a key to promoting and achieving innovation, especially in a disruptive space. And so we're very happy about the diversity that Concordia has to offer. We're also, we would like to believe, a porous university, a university that has welcomed many people who are the first individuals in their families to attend university. We've been a university that has given, I think, a chance to a lot of people. That's part of the history of the two founding institutions at Concordia, Loyola, and Sir George. But we're also trying to be a porous university the other way as well, taking our ideas out into the community through events like this and welcoming other forms of expertise into the university environment. And if universities are going to be successful in the 21st century, one of the lessons I think we have to internalize is that we don't have a monopoly on knowledge. We don't have a monopoly on expertise, and that the grand challenges facing society are much bigger than individually we can resolve in our labs, in our libraries, etc. The university, in trying to position itself as a next generation university, has made big investments in some breakthrough technology fields. We are the home to Canada's first biofoundry in synthetic biology, which is one of the great transformative technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. We also have Canada's top-ranked School of Art and Design, and bringing design thinking to problems that face society today is important. And some of you may know, if you're a Concordia grad, or even if you weren't, that we did something else pretty disruptive in the Canadian higher education landscape a couple of years ago, when, as a result of a very generous donation by one of our alumni, we renamed our engineering and computer science faculty the Gina Cody School of Engineering and Computer Science, the first engineering school in Canada named for a woman. For the last 3 years, we have been Canada's top-ranked university that's less than 50 years old, tied as the top-ranked university under 50 in North America. Before it was us, it was your University of Calgary, I'm pleased to say. And University of Calgary is a great, great model for us. Shelley mentioned it earlier, one of the things that we're trying to do is find ways, more and more ways for our students to experience the real world, to get their hands dirty, to quote one of the aims of our strategic directions, through experiential learning, study abroad experiences, through the opportunity to start up their own companies in our Innovation Incubator District 3. And helping them along their way are great young faculty who also understand the important relationship between change, society, and universities. And tonight you'll get to hear from two of our experts, Ann-Louise Davidson, who has a research chair in maker culture, and Elizabeth Fast, who was the university's first special advisor on Indigenous directions. I'll stop there. I want to just thank Shelley again and all the team at the Walrus for the partnership which we cherish. And merci à vous tous et toutes d'être venus en si grand nombre ce soir. It's truly a pleasure to see you all, and you're in for a terrific evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. So our topic tonight, disruption, a disturbance or problem that interrupt an event, activity, or process. One could argue that definition covers just about every aspect of our world today and certainly involves every sector. There is disruption, as you know, in media, world affairs, and in Canada's position, in education, energy, democracy, social media, the future of work, technology, cannabis, and a whole lot more. So the Walrus Talks is a format designed to bring you many perspectives. The goal is that you walk away thinking, I never thought of it that way. And here's how it works. Each talker has 7 minutes. They know this. You will see and hear 7 talkers for 7 minutes each, all in a row. They will each introduce themselves. You can follow along on the program you were given on your way in. The program is in speaker order. Their bios are on the back. And in about 50 minutes, exactly 50 minutes, we will have a lot to talk about at the post-talks reception, to which you are all invited. So just before I let our talkers get underway, I'd like to thank each in advance. So thank you to marketing and consumer behavior expert David Allison, to Century Initiative CEO Cheri Austin, to Chief Digital Writer at the Columbia Journalism Review, Mathew Ingram, to Associate Professor of Education and Concordia University Research Chair in Maker Culture, Ann-Louise Davidson, to Assistant Professor in the Department of Applied Human Sciences at Concordia, Elizabeth Fast, to country music artist and songwriter, Paul Brandt, and to founder and executive director of Chic Geek, Kylie Woods. And thank you all for coming. Let us begin.
Hello, my name is David Allison, and I'm here tonight to talk to you about what I've spent the last 3 years of my life doing. A big body of research that I like to think of as a blank slide. There we go. I believe this is the most foundational disruption of all. It doesn't get any more disrupty than this. This is about as disruptiveness as you can possibly ask for, and we're going to go through this tonight. And the reason for that is that this is the base level of pretty much everything that we do in our day, everything we do in our world, everything you've seen since you woke up this morning has been based on demographic stereotypes. And I'm here to tell you that they don't work anymore. I've developed a new way of thinking about our world and a new way of looking at audiences and looking at the people around us that I call value graphics, and it's nothing short of a way to change the way you look at the world. This sequence of numbers, 18 to 24, 25 to 36, 37 to 45, 46 to 54. I don't have to tell you what I'm doing. You all know that what I'm doing is naming age categories. And as soon as you see a survey or a poll or anything that has even different age categories than these ones, you know they're wrong because these are the right ones. That's how ingrained these are in our brain. This is the DNA sequence of everything around you. This sequence of numbers has created everything because everything begins in a boardroom somewhere with usually middle-aged white guys sitting around saying to each other, who are we doing this for? What age group are they? And then we start to make things up and we understand their demographic stereotypes and we use those to deploy billions of dollars in resources. But we live in what I like to call a post-demographic era. So really, this practice is nothing short of business astrology. We're using birthdays as a way to try and understand the world around us, and it just doesn't make any sense anymore. We're all laughing because we know this, but we have data now that backs it up. Let me show you just how wrong it really is. We set out to build this thing called value graphics, and it's based on this one fundamental principle of social science, psychology, consumer behavior, and it's this line, which I wish I'd come up with myself, but this is how all of those sciences look at the world. What we value, what we think is most important, determines what we do. Makes sense. So that's what we use to make ourselves this thing called value graphics. Let me tell you about values for a moment. I have a quick story I want to tell you about 3 friends in an alley at midnight. So, 3 friends are at a bar, and they're talking to each other, they're having a great time, they leave the bar, they're walking down the street, they've had maybe 1 drink too many, and it's midnight, it's dark, and we've all been in that place. We're all punching each other on the shoulder and having a great time and being a little raucous because 1 too many drinks. And suddenly we turn a corner and there's this dark alley, and we have to make a decision. So friend number 1, primary value for friend number 1 is adventure. So of course, friend number 1 wants to go down the alley. It sounds like a great way to end this evening. It's going to be a lot of fun if we go down that alley. Friend number 2, primary value is safety. Does not want to go down the alley. Wants to go back to the bar where there's lights and other people and I feel safe. Friend number 3, primary value is friendship. Doesn't really care whether we go down the alley or go back to the bar as long as we do it together. That's all I care about. Now notice each one of those scenarios, same input, same stimuli, same situation, same night, 3 different people. Who cares how old they are? They've reacted to the situation based on their primary value. So that's what's powerful, not whether you're 18 to 24, 25 to 36, or one of those other categories. So now for the first time in history, we can replace that guesswork about what are people going to do when we show them this, we build them this, we design them this, we say this to them. We can replace that with data. We've built what we call, the statisticians in the room will fall out of their chair when they hear this. It's a random, stratified, statistically representative sample of Canada and the United States, which is so fun to say after you've measured it, memorized it, and say it a few times. We have 75,000 surveys in the database, and each one talks to 380 different metrics that we've measured, 40 of which are core human values that we took from the World Values Index, the Bhutan Gross Domestic Happiness Index, other proven social science tools like that. The other 340 are questions about what we want, need, and desire in addition to those 40 core values. So 380 things we've measured. It's what they refer to as having a 95% level of confidence, plus or minus 3.5% margin of error, and 6 times more data than we need for a PhD at an Ivy League university. So the reason I'm saying this is just so that you know this is rock solid information. There is no room for this to be wrong. Boomers, 75,000 surveys, 380 different variables that we've measured. If you see how often the boomers agree with each other on any of those things, what it means to be alive and human and walking on the planet in 2018, boomers agree with each other 13% of the time, which means that 78% of the time, 77% of the time, 87% of the time, sorry, my math, 87% of the time, the boomers disagree about everything. Generation X only agrees with each other 11% of the time. And the millennials, the poor, maligned millennials, those unicorns in the enchanted forest, the millennials only agree with each other 15% of the time. How can we change the world for the millennials when they don't agree on anything any more than 15% of the time? What is really interesting is all the traditional demographic categories, income, gender, marital status, number of children, none of them score anywhere over the low teens when we look at how often they agree with each other. However, if we profile groups based on what values they share using this new research database, we get results anywhere from 76 to 89%. So that's as much as 8 times more alignment and more agreement around values-based profiling than demographic stereotypes. And that's the big takeaway. I like to talk about this last couple of slides here, the $1 test. If you're going to do something for a group of people and you have $1 to spend, you're going to make a marketing campaign, you're going to design a product, a service, a brand, an institution, a philosophy, an idea, and you spend $1 and you target based on what you know about them from a demographic stereotype perspective, you're going to get 13, 14, 15% of them to agree with you at any given point in time. If you use that same dollar and talk to people value graphically, you're going to get $8 worth of effectiveness. So that means corporations and institutions that are in things to make a buck, they will adopt this rapidly. At least that's the hope. And we can end all this nonsense about demographic stereotypes. the best path to this being something that we all accept and it just becomes part of our life is if it can make someone $1. And I think that's a really good thing. Because I believe, I get a little choked up about this, but I believe that a world based on the things we all care about our values, is going to be a much better world than one based on outdated ideas about who we are and when we were born, whether we're men or women, or whether we're rich or poor. That stuff shouldn't matter anymore. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Cheri Austin. Here's another disruptive idea for you. We need 100 million people in Canada by 2100. Yes, I said it. In other words, we need to be roughly 3 times our current size, 82 years from now. That may sound a bit shocking, but let me share a few facts. Today we have 37 million Canadians. If we stay on our current course, we'll have 55 million in 2100. Not nearly enough to ensure a thriving economy or to afford our compassionate social programs or build the infrastructure we need for livable communities, or to maintain our level of influence in the world as a trade partner and a champion of human rights and peace. The key issue is that our society is aging. We're both, one more time. There we go. We're both living longer and having fewer children. Not a great combination. You can see for yourselves the trajectory of the past 56 years. Longevity is in blue and fertility is in purple. The gap will continue to widen. Of course, Canada's not alone in this challenge. Japan is an extreme example of an aging society, about 15 years ahead of us in this, and quite possibly at a point of no return. Here you can see their dilemma expressed in sales of baby diapers versus adult diapers. 2015 was a turning point in Canada. For the first time ever, we had more people over 65 than under 15. And the trend is accelerating. Today, seniors are 17% of the population. In 2031, they'll be 25%. That people are living longer is, of course, good news. But on the flip side, older people are typically not working and are costly in terms of health care, home care, and income security programs. Combine that with the fact that we have a very low fertility rate. Canadian women now have an average of just 1.5 children each, much lower than the replacement level of 2.1, and that's not likely to rise anytime soon. Definitely not in my household anyway. The point is that fewer and fewer working people are supporting more older people. In the 70s, there were 6 working people for every older person. Today, it's 4, and in 2036, the ratio will be 2 to 1. That means a smaller tax base just when costs are increasing. We simply won't have the people to run the economic engine that supports us all. So size does matter. At 50 million people in 2100, our annual GDP rate will be less than 1.6%. With 100 million people, it will be a healthier 2.6. So if we don't set our sights on serious growth, taxes are going to have to rise, or programs will have to be cut, or both. But before we all throw up our hands in despair, there is a fairly obvious solution. We need more immigration. Yes, there are some other things that might help. We could double down on fertility, but even if that works, it will take at least 20 years for those kids to reach the workforce, or many, many more in the case of my kids. We could try harder to lure some of the 3 million Canadians home who are living abroad. We could increase the retirement age. But these options won't get us where we need to go. Immigration will. And believe it or not, we've grown at this pace before in less time. Between 1945 and now, 73 years, we went from a population of 12 to 37 million. So maybe aiming at 100 million in 2100 isn't that disruptive. To be clear, we're not talking about bringing millions of people a year. Raising the annual immigration target to 450,000 from today's 310,000 may well do the trick if we start soon. We are already among the best in the world at sourcing immigrants, using the point system to target economic immigrants with the skills we need. But we can be bolder on the numbers. International students, for example, are some of the most ideal new Canadians. And with the US and Britain now clamping down on students wanting to stay, we have a great opportunity. And let's remember that our immigrant story is a really positive one. Immigrants to this country are better educated, start more businesses, commit fewer crimes, and are healthier than Canadian-born residents. That said, there will be real challenges ahead. We'll need to get better at supporting settlement, encouraging immigrants to go where they're most needed, qualifying their skills more quickly, and removing barriers to success. Governments will need to make smart policy decisions and investment choices in areas like infrastructure, education, employment, and early childhood support, and we'll need to protect and strengthen our culture of pluralism. At the same time, we must ensure that Indigenous people take their rightful place in our growing economy and that our growth is environmentally sustainable. But these are challenges we need to face up to, whether we're 55 or 100 million. All of this will take government commitment and community-level work, but maybe the place to start is with personal reflection. My family's story has shaped my view of the country, as I'm sure yours has. My grandparents, poor Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, found a place for themselves here in Calgary. They did what many did then and now. They opened a small business. In this case, the North Star Grocery on 2nd Avenue Northwest. You may know it today as the Vendôme Cafe. The family built a life here, although not without difficulty. My father and 2 sisters grew up in the back of the store. Their mother died of breast cancer. Their father had an industrial accident and was in the hospital for more than a year. But my father grew up to be a lawyer and ultimately a senator, and the most optimistic person I know. His sisters went into nursing and civil service. The next generation became business owners, lawyers, teachers, journalists, healthcare workers, and architects. That's my family. Give or take a few details, it may also be your family. Hard work, optimism brings rewards, if not for you, at least for your children or theirs. What if our relatives had stayed where they were and not bet on the future? How much more difficult would our lives be, and how much less would Canada be? I'm proud to be part of an organization, the Century Initiative, that's focused on a bigger and bolder future for Canada. We're committed to building out the fact base, encouraging the conversation, and coming up with concrete ideas for action. We're hoping that others will join in taking the long view and steering Canada to a prosperous 2100. We don't by any means have all the answers, but we do know we need to get started. In closing, I'd like to leave you with a quote from Margaret Atwood, a great friend of the Walrus. There is an infinite number of possible futures. Which one will actually become the future will depend on how we behave right now. Thank you.
Hi there. My name is Mathew Ingram, and I'd like to talk to you tonight about disruption in the media, the disruption of journalism, and in fact, the disruption of our entire information ecosystem. Obviously, that's a pretty big topic, given what's been happening with newspapers dying, Facebook taking over advertising, Russian trolls weaponizing fake news, and so on. That's what I'd like to talk to you about, but that would take way more than 7 minutes, and I'm very conscious of the fact that Shelley will kill me if I go over my limit. So instead of doing that, I'd like to tell you a story. I worked at the Globe and Mail around the turn of the century. Globe and Mail is a big newspaper based in Toronto. Around the turn of the century, that was the most recent century. And that was right after the newspaper launched a real-time news website, which was a big deal. One of the things we did was to add the ability for readers to add comments on news articles. That seems kind of antiquated, like I'm talking about when the telephone was invented or something. But it was kind of a big deal at the time. As far as I know, we were the first newspaper in North America to do that. And to be honest, it was kind of a shock to the system. Anyway, one of the first comments we got was on a news story about a bridge that collapsed in Quebec. And this reader said that he was an engineer who had worked on bridges and road construction in Quebec, and it was common for people to add salt to the concrete mix so that it wouldn't freeze in the winter. The only problem was that the salt eventually ate into the rebar and things would collapse. That was probably one of the most useful pieces of information we could ever have gotten about that story at the time. And it was someone who just volunteered it on the internet. Before the internet, someone would have had to spend, probably me, would have had to spend days or even weeks trying to find structural engineers who'd worked in Quebec, trying to find the person with the right piece of information. So at this point, I'm feeling all optimistic about how great this internet thing is for journalism. And then just a few days later, we got another comment. It was on a story about Simon Wiesenthal, the Nazi hunter who had just died. And this anonymous person said basically, who cares about Simon Wiesenthal? All he cared about was the Jews, and besides, the Holocaust probably never happened anyway. I think you can figure out how the rest of that comment went. Within a week or two, we had seen both the best the internet could offer and the worst that it could offer. And in a way, everything I've seen since then, with a few exceptions, has been on a continuum between those 2 points. As it turns out, giving everyone on the planet a megaphone with which they can make their thoughts known to everyone around them has a downside. Who would have expected? And I think we've seen lately a lot of the worst of that spectrum, thanks in part to the fact that the President of the United States is a giant troll and has given, the troll-in-chief, I like to call him, and has given a lot of people the freedom to feel like they can also say hateful things. This is called shifting the Overton window, if you're a sociologist. In other words, making behavior that was once unacceptable seem acceptable. In a lot of ways, I think the past decade has been a process of shifting, certainly for me, from what was initially a really sort of Pollyanna-ish view of what the internet could enable. And now the pendulum has swung until it's almost all the bad things that we're focusing on, social media can do, or the internet, whether it's hate speech or harassment. And I don't want to minimize those things, but I think it's important to say that I believe the truth or reality exists somewhere between those two extremes. So for every Russian troll farm that uses Facebook and Twitter to spread misinformation about Hillary Clinton in an attempt to swing the election, there's something like the Black Lives Matter movement, which I hope has opened a lot of people's eyes to the reality of what it's like to be a black person in the US right now, and in particular, the systemic racism on the part of the police and other government agencies. Or take the Me Too movement. That's helped a lot of women tell their stories, and in some cases even get justice, and it's exposed a culture of harassment and abuse that's been largely hidden for decades. Things like that, I think, have to count as a win, or at least a partial win, for the internet. So the same tools that allow trolls to harass people also allow protesters in Egypt and Iran and so on to tell their stories themselves instead of waiting for some Western journalist to do it for them. And in fact, Myanmar is a great example of both the good and the bad of the internet. Facebook in particular has been weaponized there against the Rohingya Muslims who've been driven from their homes, tortured, and in some cases killed. And yet the same tools have also allowed us to see and hear about that kind of disaster a lot faster, instead of years later when someone decides to write a book. I'm not trying to downplay the bad that's done with the internet, but I would like us to keep in mind the good that it can do as well. When old things like newspapers die, sometimes new and better things are born, and it's fine to mourn the dead things, but I also think it's good to look for and celebrate the new things that are working as well. At least that's what I keep telling myself. Thank you very much.
Hello, bonsoir. I'm Ann-Louise Davidson. It's April 1985 in the small town of Hawkesbury, Ontario. I'm wearing tight Levi's jeans tucked inside high-cut Nike running shoes. I'm heading to my high school information session for my grade 9 registration. I'm with my father. The high school in Hawkesbury has many shops. I can't wait to learn about working with wood, to solder, to connect circuits. I'm fascinated with shop, with learning, and with making things. The advisor says no, I cannot enroll in shop class. He says shop class leads to trade and factory jobs, not the things girls do. The advisor tells me to learn bookkeeping and typewriting instead. But I can't wait to learn about working with wood, to solder, to connect circuits. I do it anyway. I enrolled in shop. I engage in disruptive learning early. Fast forward to 2018, and now learning to use tools is hip. We encourage girls to pick up drills and make holes in wood as much as they wish. All over the country, people envy schools that have places to make things, and now we have a name for these places. They're called maker spaces. Children are learning to program robots, how to use 3D printers, create videos on green screens, how to prototype, hack, build, design, and fix things. The makerspace phenomenon is a new shop class. It has traditional tools along with new emerging tools and all the hype around it. It is fueled by a new global movement called the Maker Movement. And with it comes a way of learning, a maker pedagogy, disrupting the usual flow of learning in schools. Maker spaces, maker pedagogy, maker culture. It's a maker movement, and it's growing. Maker culture is everywhere in the world. It embodies do-it-yourself tinkering using tiny, affordable, open-source computers, electronics, recycled items. And through making, we learn invaluable life lessons. We engage in persistent problem-solving. We create solutions to real-world problems. We imagine alternative ways of thinking about our life with technology, and we discover a world of connections. And maker culture, however, is not new. Every country has its own take. In Quebec, you will find les patenteux et les patenteuses, which refers to those who can find solutions to problems with very little means. In Canada, we often call it tinkering, which refers to making small changes to something to improve it. In India, there is jugaad, which means to think outside the box when the odds are not in your favor. And in Turkey, there's haretmek, the art of fixing things rapidly with the means one possesses, and the list goes on and on. Now, what does maker culture look like? Culture is never something we can easily see, but our luck is that there are hundreds of fab labs, small-scale workshops where people can learn to make almost anything, repair cafes, and things called maker spaces across the country where we can see makers in action. So who are these makers? Now, unless someone has a shirt that says, "I'm a maker," there's no way to know. Makers come from all over the strands of life, from trades and engineering, as well as seemingly unrelated domains, such as the social sciences, humanities, fine arts, and business. From all social classes and all generations. Seniors like to show up, to show their know-how and show up at repair cafes. Children can be seen building traditional African wire cars or manipulating solder irons and drills. It's the mega mix of people engaged in do-it-yourself activities. And maker culture is often misunderstood. Like, for example, I'm frequently asked if I will patent one of my inventions. I had missing handles for my windows, so I designed new ones with the measurements of the existing holes, and I printed them using a 3D printer. Yes, I had fun doing it, but why patent that? The whole spirit of maker culture is to create, share, remix, and connect. There are millions of 3D models shared with open source licenses online, and sometimes we create them, other times we reuse models created by someone else. So why is maker culture so important for education? What does this modern take on shop class mean for the way we teach and learn? Maker culture is a disruptive pedagogy. Making changes learning. In making things, there is no single right answer, no same scenario. There are only problems to solve and solutions to seek. This changes also the traditional teacher and learner roles. There's nobody teaching in front of the class. We're all in this together. Nobody knows the answer, not even myself. Nobody possesses all the knowledge to solve the problems. The community knowledge structure is bigger than the sum of the knowledge of each of its members. This changes the rules, and this is why we call it disruptive pedagogy. Now, disruption has an interesting etymology. In the 15th century, it was used to talk about a rending asunder or a bursting apart of something. Later, it was used to talk about a laceration of a tissue. Today, we often hear about disruptive technology or disruptive innovation. These are technologies that displace established technologies and shake up the industry. And my work is about continuing to grow maker culture, maker spaces, as a form of disruptive education. Disruptive teaching and learning, or pedagogy, is about changing the rules. Just like when we tell the child, okay, instead of talking about the theory of how a drone works or how an arcade table is created, let's make a drone. Let's make an arcade table. And if we make it, we will know it, and that is disruptive. Thank you.
Tantse, Elizabeth Dishnakaoshun, Saint François Xavier Manitoba, Duchesne. Nia Parenti, Kaya, Ushi, Ojibwe, Cree, Dene, Sioux, Métis, Mina, Mennonite. Hello, my name is Elizabeth. I'm from Saint François Xavier, Manitoba. My ancestors were Ojibwe, Cree, Dene, Sioux, French, Métis, and Mennonite. I'd like to first acknowledge the traditional caretakers of Treaty 7 territory, the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Métis. The theme of tonight's talk is disruption, and I'd like to put forward the idea that a radical disruption in post-secondary institutions would mean getting comfortable with acknowledging and embracing that values and emotions are integral to effective learning. I studied social work and worked in the field of child welfare for almost a decade. My formal education taught me how to turn off my emotions, put up boundaries with other human beings, and to separate myself into the category of professional, while those that I worked with became clients. One of my first jobs after graduating with a Bachelor of Social Work degree was as an intake worker for a child welfare organization. I remember one instance where I'd been working with a young woman for a few months who had no family in the country. We had developed what I thought was a good relationship, but as it happens in child welfare, the file, this young woman, was going to be transferred to another department or another person, another worker. So I asked my supervisor if it might be okay if I continued to see this young woman as a sort of a big sister or mentorship type of arrangement. My idea was maybe I could take her out on an outing every few weeks and provide some kind of steady connection at a time in her life when she had so few. The idea didn't go over so well. It was explained to me that once we were no longer assigned to work with children and families, we needed to terminate the relationship because it wouldn't have been professional to continue a relationship outside of the child welfare structure. I remember feeling saddened by this, but not really having the experience or courage to push back at that time. As a professor supervising students in youth work placements now 15 years later, it seems to me that little has changed. A few weeks ago, one of my students told me about how she was placed at a group home for adolescents, and one of the youth was being moved to another placement, and she thought it would be a good idea to buy him a gift. She also asked her supervisor if she could take him and the other youth to the park for a small celebration and goodbye. The student was told that gifts were not normally allowed and that they couldn't really interrupt the daily routine of all the other youth to go to the park. She was told if we do it for him, we need to do it for everyone, and it's better just to get used to youth coming and going. We certainly can't get attached to every one of them. To me, there's something so striking about the notion that at an organization that's removing children from their homes to provide what is supposed to be a safer environment, that we're not thinking more critically about how to model what healthy, loving relationships should look like. Similarly, I believe we're sending thousands of university graduates out into the workforce every year with the idea that knowledge is something attained with our minds, but detached from our emotional, spiritual, and physical selves. The Michif word for knowledge is kishkaiten, and I would argue that in this era of so-called decolonization of our educational institutions, it's imperative that we are critical about what constitutes knowledge in our classrooms. Indigenous frameworks of thought are centered around our values. 3 core Métis values are sharing, caring, and kindness. Sean Wilson, Cree scholar, writes about Indigenous axiology, the idea that there's values and ethics that are a core component of an Indigenous paradigm. I've heard elders and knowledge keepers say time and again, it's all about relationships. Of course, they're talking about relationships between humans, but also relationships with Mother Earth, older brother Sun, grandmother Moon, our 4-legged friends, and the spiritual world. How would our young people in the foster care system be treated differently if all of our courses centered Indigenous knowledge systems? If we truly believe it's all about relationships, would we be able to move beyond paradigms that limit our caring, sharing, and kindness due to bureaucratic structures and notions of inconvenience and inefficiency? As a Métis woman and mother trying to make sense of the way that formal institutions have sometimes implemented colonial ways of teaching, I've experimented and made efforts to break down the barriers between professor as expert and the students as empty vessels needed to be filled up with knowledge. We often use talking circles in the classroom in order to hear from everyone in the room and to process emotions that might have come up during different activities. I hear from my students time and again that they so value being able to show up in a classroom as complex individuals with their own sets of emotions, values, and experiences to share with others. Over the years, I've heard colleagues and other educators say things like the classroom is not a place for therapy, and that emotions are really better left in private spaces like counselors' offices. But I wonder, isn't this the exact opposite of what we teach children? We want our children to know that it's healthy to identify our emotions, share them with others, and have common spaces of understanding, empathy, and shared support. When we discuss the realities of racism and colonization, isn't it in fact quite normal that difficult emotions will arise? I've been involved in many conversations about decolonizing the academy over the past few years, and yet I still notice a distinct discomfort with the idea that values or emotions or spirituality should be part of a university environment. But I wonder, how do we genuinely move forward with decolonization without truly trying to understand the values at the heart of Indigenous knowledge systems? Manalani Meyer, Hawaiian scholar, says that real learning happens with the emotional transmission of an accurate message. And in real learning, there is no ego, so you change. She says, I want you to push through some of your discomfort in order to share and receive an idea. And I hope that we've all been able to achieve a small piece of that tonight. Marcy, all my relations.
My name is Paul Brandt, and I'm a country music singer, songwriter, and recording artist, and I'd like to talk to you about respectful disruption. I'm not an expert on business, fashion, politics, strategy, or culture. I'm just a guy who's had some cool experiences, and I'm here to tell you about what I've learned, and I also love stories. Disruption has shaken me up over and again on both the business and social front. What I want to propose today is that the way one handles business and social disruption takes finesse if the goal is to create something that the world needs, especially in the social arena. In 1997, the winds of change began to blow in the music industry. Warning signs had been rumbling, and as a young, tech-savvy musician, I had a feeling the effects were going to be massive. I recall a conversation I had with the then president of Reprise Records in Nashville, and I asked him what his digital strategy was with the MP3 on the way. The MP3 is a passing fad, he said. It's like the CB radio. Here today and gone tomorrow. Some people just don't get it. Change is always coming, and you can lead, follow, or get run over. The ability to pivot has become one of the most important skills of the modern era. Today, 21 years later, he is out of a job and almost correct. The MP3 and its disruptive effects are still very much in play, but we barely talk about it because it's simply become a cog in the wheel of the most monumental change any industry has ever seen. The good news is that the transcendent connection, healing, and escape provided by music are a constant. Music will always find a way, but the world of music today is a bit like a beehive right after it's been kicked. Ultimately, it was probably a good thing. It shook things up momentarily, giving control back to creators, and made music more accessible than it had ever been in history. Premium music providers were undermined, and consumers who had been gouged for years suddenly had the upper hand. Music is slowly migrating back to being controlled by industry, but opportunity abounds for the brave. It truly is the Wild West. That was business. Let's move to values. 14 years ago, I was on a dusty street in the Southeast Asian district of Svepak in Cambodia. Gang activity was rampant, and it was notorious for organized crime activity. During the day, children were being drugged and kept in a warehouse across the street from a new construction project. During the evening, they were systematically drugged once again and sent off to work as slaves. Those whose little bodies inevitably wore out and had died were buried behind a new build with no grave marker, ceremony, or remembrance. The facility being built was to be as modern and efficient as possible. Funded by a California-based businessman, it was to be a sex destination hotel to exploit children as young as 5 years old, catering to international clientele. A group of us had gathered to support an organization that was trying to disrupt this activity. We made the businessman funding the project nervous, and he put the nearly completed building on the market as his ability to turn a good profit was being challenged. So we bought it, and we turned it into a school, clinic, and church. And we watched as over the next 4 years, the entire community changed. Former mass graves and playgrounds became playgrounds, pride of ownership and safety increased, and a healthy community began to flourish. Although a disruptive innovation in business occurred, humans were freed from being enslaved to being free to pursue their own choices. In this small community, the overarching disruption was a disruption in values. We drew a line in the sand and stood up for the value and sanctity of human life. And it got me thinking, should this newfound peace, safety, and tranquility now be challenged once again? Now that it's working, maybe we should disrupt it. What it led me to is this. I'm a songwriter, and to create anything novel, I must shut off the critic in my head and test boundaries, get messy. You have to ask the tough questions, shake up the status quo. As a good friend of mine in Nashville likes to say, you have to dare to suck. Disruption inevitably makes things messy, but I believe indiscriminate disruption for the simple sake of disruption can be a dangerous thing, especially when it comes to the concept of social innovation. As a famous redneck once said in his last words, "Hey y'all, watch this." We shouldn't be afraid to break things so that we can make them better, but we must soberly consider whether the disruption we're about to embark upon is something that the world needs. This, of course, is subjective, but before we begin freeing Pandora, I believe it's critical for us to ask if our disruption will encourage freedom, not only for one, but for all. Disruption which infringes upon the freedom of another will always devolve into destruction. My favorite project to spring out of my recent role as storyteller in residence at Mount Royal University's Business and Marketing School is the anti-human trafficking awareness movement called Not in My City. By striving for better and allowing the needs of victims and survivors to drive our activities, we're seeing a shift which we believe will be of benefit to our entire society by making everyone more free, and we're gaining momentum. I hope you'll check out what we're doing and join us at notinmycity.ca. And yet, there's resistance. Who are you to be the morality police? Do you really think you'll affect change in this? There are people who choose this life. Before music, I was a registered nurse at the Alberta Children's Hospital, and a well-known adage in the medical profession is do no harm. And yet, to make change, you gotta blow some stuff up. And so the tension remains. We must shake things up to make things new and improve the future, and yet our best teacher is often history and the past. Disruptive innovation of values should be undertaken with extreme caution. Values are not businesses to be innovated, improved, toppled, and discarded. They are either based on truth or they are not. Truth cannot be disrupted. Truth simply is. And yet free will allows us to decide what we will do with truth. Free will and one's right to continue on a chosen path is sacred. It must be upheld. We should all have the opportunity to choose. But who ultimately pays for those choices? And what about personal responsibility? In an accepting, inclusive society, who gets to decide what's right and what's wrong, what's better and what's best? If one person's truth comes at the expense of another's, as it inevitably will, what do we do with that? What's the standard? Indiscriminate disruption for the sake of disruption is ill-advised. Choosing not to look both ways before crossing the street feels novel and revolutionary, right up until the bus disrupts your day. There are laws which disruptive thinking can help us to understand, just as there are certain realities disruptive thinking will never change. And one of those realities is that people are precious. Disrupt but do no harm seems to be a good policy to me. Striving to be at peace with one another whenever possible and employing courtesy are underrated, underused skills today. A respectfully disruptive path will be our only chance for a civil and functional society. Thank you.
Hello, I am Kylie Woods, and I'm the founder and executive director of Chic Geek. In the average lifetime, each one of us will work for 90,360 hours. That's a lot of hours. Technology is driving a shift in how we work, and for the first time, we have the power to shape what our work looks like. I believe it's time for us to start shaping our work instead of letting our work shape who we are and how we live our lives. With Chic Geek, I've taken a non-traditional approach to work. I'm going to share that journey with you, along with 2 trends disrupting the future of work and how you can leverage them to redesign your own work life. As the executive director of a nonprofit, I lead a team of 42 amazing volunteers. And together we host 25 events a year, curating content, people, and companies to build a supportive community where tech-enabled women advance their careers. I work from home, co-working spaces, coffee shops, and I have the flexibility to work and travel at the same time. We are living in the 4th industrial revolution. One of the biggest changes we are seeing is automation. Advances in automation are reshaping jobs, reducing repetitive and physical tasks to be done by machines. But what does this mean? Yes, some jobs will be lost, but many more will be created. Because of this shift in technology, a growth mindset is an essential skill in today's workforce. Coined by psychologist Carol Dweck, someone with a growth mindset believes we're not born with a set intelligence, but rather we can grow and expand our abilities through dedication and hard work. Technology adoption requires a growth mindset. Using technology isn't something we're born knowing how to do, but through effort and persistence, it is something we can all learn. If we apply a growth mindset to learning new technologies, it doesn't matter how many jobs are lost in the technology automation shift, because we'll be able to keep up with the new ones that are created. Instead of doing those repetitive tasks ourselves, we ensure that we're the ones guiding the machines to do it for us. You can also apply a growth mindset to designing your work. When I started Chic Geek, it was a project on the side of my desk. I was working full-time in marketing, communications, and design. I was having dinner with my now husband, and we were talking about what the future holds for us. Marriage, family, kids, work, life, how all of those things fit together. And I was having a really hard time imagining the career track that I was currently on also supporting the home and family life I imagined for myself. So here's where the growth mindset comes into play, and I started to get creative. I took a hard look at what was most important to me in my work, and 2 things emerged as key components to a happy work life: freedom and autonomy. I imagined a no-commute workday where you're not driving on the Deerfoot for 45 minutes, where I could wake up, make a cup of coffee, crack open my laptop, and work in my pajamas. I imagined carving out a 4-day work week for myself, if I chose to. And this was the moment when things changed for me. I stopped seeing Chic Geek as a project on the side of my desk and started seeing it as a viable career option where I could build those things for myself. This part of the story is meant to remind you that the future of work starts with you. It's not driven by technology, but rather supported by it. It starts with your vision, your imagination of what work can be. The second major shift we're seeing in the future of work is around work models. We're moving towards a gig economy, where temporary positions are common and companies contract independent workers for project-based engagements. It's predicted that in 2 years from now, 40% of the workforce will be independent contractors. When I quit my job to dedicate more time to Chic Geek, I dove into the gig economy, freelancing as a web designer. I worked at Chic Geek for free for a year, giving 80% of my work time to build the organization to a place where we could hire a staff member. The other 20% of my work time was allocated to paid freelance projects to help me pay the bills. So the gig economy let me work 1 day out of my 5-day work week for paid work and spend 4 days volunteering. It was a difficult journey, but it was worth it. And today, I get to wake up and do what I love on my terms, pajamas included. The shift towards a gig economy creates flexibility and opportunity. This new model enables you to build the life and career you imagine for yourself. So we've explored 2 key trends in the future of work, automation and the gig economy. But what does it mean for you? If you're ready to start shaping your work instead of letting it shape you, here are 3 questions I challenge you to explore tonight. 1, imagine the work life you want for yourself. If you can imagine it, you can create it, but it starts with you. So what does a happy work life look like for you? 2, adopt a growth mindset, especially when it comes to learning new technologies. So what's one thing you can do tomorrow to flex your growth mindset? And 3, how can you leverage the gig economy to help you achieve the work life you want? I want to share one last story with you. I'd like to introduce you to my mom. Her name is Joanne, and she's a retired social worker whose 27-year career has spanned pediatrics to geriatrics at the Saskatoon Health Region. She lives in Saskatoon, but she's in Calgary almost every month because she helps take care of my grandparents. She's recently started working for a tech startup where she counsels people online. She can work from wherever she wants as long as she has her computer and a good internet connection. She's learning new technologies, taking training, and redesigning her career and her future. I'm so proud of her because at 59, she's proof that it's never too late to start.
Thank you to all of our talkers. Thinking about that pivot moment. Like, first of all, my mother would never let me say, that sucks. So you can't dare to suck. My mother is here. My mother used to say, don't say that sucks, that's terrible. Say, that doesn't rock. I did the same thing to my children. So I just want to point out, Paul, you have to dare not to rock, which I know is hard for a country singer. There you go. The other thing in my pivot moment is I'm selling all my cannabis stock and buying adult diaper stock. That is the thing that is sticking in my mind. I'm going to go straight home and do that. Please join me in thanking our talkers, Allison, Cheri Austin, Mathew Ingram, Ann-Louise Davidson, Elizabeth Fast, Paul Brandt, and Kylie Woods. Now, I am going to ask our front row to please stand up. I'm going to hold the rest of the audience for a minute. You can clap for them again on their way out. They'll meet you at the reception. You guys, I should go. As I mentioned earlier, this is our 99th Walrus Talks. That means there are now more than 700 7-minute Walrus Talks videos that you can watch on our YouTube channel whenever you want. You can also watch them at thewalrus.ca, where you can subscribe. But as you know, it's much more convenient and cheaper to just do so tonight in the lobby, where Tina and Kaylin and Amay and Andrea, the Walrus team, will be happy to meet you and sign you up for a subscription. A full year subscription to the Walrus is just $25 tonight. And remember that thing I told you about our matching donors? Every dollar you donate tonight will be matched dollar for dollar. So just like that, your $10 becomes $20 like magic. It's just like a magic thing. And so you can meet the Walrus team out there. I should say this. Fake news is really cheap to produce. You just say something and put it out there. It costs nothing. But fact-based journalism costs a lot. So we would really like you to join these wonderful Calgarians and Canadians who are helping us to support fact-based journalism and the Canadian conversation. Also, please sign up for our newsletter to make sure you don't miss any Walrus Talks in Calgary. We're back February 20th with Suncor Presents the Walrus Talks Youth Leadership. So sign up for that. And if you go to the Walrus subscription table, I can also put my parents there. You can meet my parents, Ron and Diane. Just don't say that sucks in front of my mother. Okay, don't do that. I would like to thank Graham Carr, Sammy Antaki, Philippe Beauregard, Joanne Pelche, Alan Shepard, and everyone at Concordia University for your incredible support. Thank you to the Concordia alumni for being here with us tonight. Thank you to everyone at Theatre Junction Grand. We love this place. Thank you to our national partners at Inspire and Shaw for being with us everywhere we go. Please join us at the reception where there is food and there is drink. And if you are there, there will be great conversation, because the truth is, we are not the Walrus. You are the Walrus. Good night. Thank you for coming. Safe home.